Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Aspiration, in its simplest definition, is a lovely flame climbing heavenward. True aspiration can and does make us feel that if God is for us, who can eventually stand against us? We feel a desire to have God on our side, but we need the aspiration to throw ourselves on God's side. The sun is the only remedy for the dark clouds in the sky. Similarly, there is no other medicine than aspiration for our troubled hearts. Aspiration is the first rung of the sky-kissing ladder. Realization is the last. True human aspiration has three intimate friends: purification, quietude, and intensity. Aspiration has an enemy called impatience. Aspiration is the mounting flame of our divine wish to raise ourselves to the crest and crowning of divine perfection. The body aspires through action. The vital aspires through struggles. The mind aspires through self-search. The heart aspires through the feeling of union. The soul aspires to the perfection of God's manifestation. Dan Ferguson, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Jake, that's a stunning introduction. I don't know what it has to do with me, but I'm trying to live up to it.
Well, no, I don't want you to listen to me. That is not those words came from a great teacher I never had a chance to meet, but that was from Sri Chinmoy, and he was a guy I've interviewed 4 times. He was Mahavishnu John McLaughlin's guru.
Yeah.
And your father. To me, I really fell in love with music because of something your father did at Fantasy Studios. You were on. It was so beautiful because you were playing guitar. It was VHS, Bill Maxwell and Abe Laboriel with Freddie Hubbard, 81.
Oh, right.
All right. And I saw your dad and Freddie looked like he had done a lot of coke. But your dad was conducting the whole place, and Freddie had so much respect for him. And then I found that Kenneth Patcham album, and I realized that your dad at that point, your dad was ensconced in he was a brilliant composer and arranger, and also completely aligned with the beat culture. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your memories of being ensconced in that culture.
Well, I have quite a few memories of that. I was young, and he was indeed a fine composer, a really well-rounded and accomplished musician, and he had great philosophies around it that worked for him. I mean, he was a hard-working guy. I remember asking him late in life. He died about 11 years ago, and I asked him late in life, for some of his recollections, and I would occasionally do that. And he said, all I remember is working my ass off.
Yeah.
And I mean, he did some wild stuff, and I'm happy to talk about him because he was, of course, one of my primary inspirations. I remember, we had a group called the Chamber Jazz Sextet, which was his first.
It's my favorite it's the coolest freaking album, and it's very similar to what Mingus was doing with a cat on the East Coast. I got to get the guy's name, but I think it might have been Patchen. I'm not sure though. Continue.
Well, I think my dad is actually credited with the first poetry and jazz recording, and there are a couple of firsts on that record too. I think that's the first commercial recording with a Wurlitzer electric piano.
We're talking about the Chamber Jazz Sextet from '57.
Yeah,
I think you're 100% right. Continue. Unbelievable. And that is the coolest. That in itself. I mean, can you at all fill in what in what they were doing, what was going on at that time? Because it was so hip. And
well, Dad taught at Stanford at the time.
He did?
He
Oh
he went
my!
to San Jose State, and then he went to Stanford, and he got he had a doctorate from Stanford in music composition that he was teaching there. And he remembered. I remember him telling me that he had a student in his class, and he asked him, "Why didn't you do your homework?" And the guy said, "What do I care? I just have to take this class." He said, "My dad could, buy and sell you 100 times." And my dad looked at him and thought, "What the hell does that mean?"
Yeah, right.
And little by little, he became pretty disenchanted with the educational process, and I don't think that's any, studying music in college was kind of didn't make sense to him.
No, well, I mean, at that time there was no, but I mean, that's the other thing. There was no jazz schools, so you could. I mean,
No,
it was
weren't.
it was all classically based, and if you were going to figure out stuff that he did with Kenton, you were making that up on the street pretty much, or in the studio.
I suppose so, but he took, nevertheless, he had a great feel and respect for, the great composers, especially Bach. And,
Sure.
So he wrote the thing I sent you that he wrote for Kenton was similar to the things that he wanted to do with the Chamber Jazz Sextet, because that title was described what he did. He wanted to do chamber music for jazz, for a jazz group that was similar in scope to what the great composers did in the 18th and 19th century. And he took those forms of music, like the Kenton thing is called Passacaglia and Fugue, and this is a form that was used by the great composers. A passacaglia is basically a bass line that repeats itself, and the chords, whatever you want to work with. I mean, the chords present themselves, as an obvious choice, and then they can get outside of that as long as the bass line continues. Now, this is something that's used all the time in pop music, jazz music, contemporary music, the idea of a repeating bass line, but he changes everything on top of it. So he's experimenting with different orchestrations and different ways of combining on top of this bass line. But he's doing it in a jazz idiom, not in a classical idiom. So he's using modern harmonies and everything. And his approach to harmony was not based on the standard harmony that you would learn in school, learn in college. He studied with a guy named Julius Gold in Beverly Hills by mail. And I've got all the letters
By
back
mail?
and forth. They studied by mail.
That
when he
is
was at
so
San Jose
ridiculous.
State. He'd always been kind of disenfranchised with the way music was taught. He would just scorn some of the books, the way that they described harmony.
I love, dude, the man. I'm telling you, I just before you go on, I was in graduating Boston University in 1999, and just seeing that VHS tape with you and your dad, I'm like, this man is. I mean, he was clearly 81. It was a very different time, but you could tell that he had, let's just say he had lived a life. Continue.
He was quietly in control of any orchestra he got in front of. And that's not because he had a giant ego like some of these guys do. I mean, he had a healthy ego, but he saw music and composition. When he was writing, and he wrote all the time, and his penmanship was extraordinarily beautiful. And but he said, what I have here is not music. It's a complicated set of instructions for playing music, and it's not music until everybody gets together and they play. And so this was a really important concept to him. He says, no matter, because what I do here is as fine an indication of what we could do as a group, but it's never music until everybody plays it. So he wrote for the players when he was in LA. He had Bud Shank and Bill Perkins,
Oh.
and Bobby Schutz, Huck Finley, all the greatest players that ever lived.
Lou Blackburn, yeah.
Who am I trying
George
to-
Bohannon, Ernie Watts, yeah, all these cats, yeah.
Everybody, Ernie, because I saw Ernie recently. I have his new record, which is spectacular. I saw them at. I went to see at the Baked Potato with Tommy Rotella.
Oh.
And
I love Ernie
playing
Watts,
with
dude.
him.
Ernie's a dear friend and
Yeah.
a brilliant freaking cat. But yeah, so your dad was.
Oh my God.
So I mean, his philosophy though, like before. Well, I just want to be very clear. I mean, what's fascinating is that I wrote I'll send you my books. I've written, my fourth is about to come out, but my second book is about the Merry Pranksters and Ken Kesey, among other things. And
I was listening to that last night. Your interview with.
with Larry Brilliant,
Yeah,
and
what's
and what I do know about Stanford in the late 50s is that, not that your dad was in this, but that Richard Alpert was a psychology student there.
Is that right?
And was your dad, would you say that he was a beatnik?
No, I don't think he considered himself that at all. He had gotten out of the he was a pilot, and there's a great Gene
Holy
Lee's
cow.
interview with Dad, all about that. And he flew P-38s. Well, when he got out of the Army, he went back to studying music at San Jose State, and he got a scholarship to go study with Aaron Copland in Tanglewood. So he went back there, studied with Aaron, and he talks all about this with Gene Lee's.
Well, wait, I just want to stop you right there. This is so important.
Yeah.
Is it and you would put the years at Lenox or in Tanglewood? What years were those?
I think that's 49, 50.
Oh my God! So you're telling me that his concept of harmony predated the harmonic concepts of Ornette Coleman?
I don't know. I mean, Ornette, somebody I greatly admire, and he. I don't know.
I was just going to say because he was at Lenox teaching with John Lewis, and 10 years after your dad was studying with Copeland. That is remarkable legacy. It is. Yeah, but your dad's ultimately in the studio when he was writing, at least early on. The idea was that he would write for the players, but the players would not have heard or practiced the music until they played the first note together.
Well, that's not true with the Chamber Jazz Sextet. Those guys rehearsed religiously.
Okay.
And because the music was not undifficult,
Yeah.
And some of it, obviously later on when we were doing sessions and so forth, he people were expected to pretty much read it. That sight read it, and that was one of his philosophies. Was he understood the instruments he wrote for. He knew the ranges, which every orchestrator, of course, does, but he knew the nuances of how they were played. He knew that they needed to take breaths, and he knew that he wanted it to sound good the first time it was played to. So he wrote hard stuff, but it wasn't unplayable. It was eminently playable for them, and he knew that he wanted it to be satisfying for everybody. He was not an egomaniac where that you need to play what's on the page.
I just felt like the guy
demanded.
demanded. He worked his ass off. He demanded a lot, and he also gave the guys a lot of creative freedom too.
Yes, he did, because he loved the guys. Because, like I say, it wasn't music until they got together and all played.
I love that line. Where did you?
Yeah.
Is that your line? I mean, that's an amazing line.
No, that's his line.
Dude, yeah. That is the great. So, I mean, what does that mean to you? Well, I think that's poetry right there.
It is, and his students, because later on he taught quite a bit, and his students, I sometimes talk with them, and they all comment on how refreshing it was to work with. He was definitely a taskmaster in some ways, and kind of a curmudgeon, but he was also a fun-loving and very hip guy. I remember one time he was in the hospital, had to go to the hospital for something. And I took the newspaper over to him one morning. It was like 7 o'clock. And he was in a room, and let's see, who's the guy that wrote Laura? I forgot his name for a second.
Continue. Just keep going. Yeah.
David Raxon was in the same room in a bed. He had come in to have an operation, and the two of them were already up. They already had the newspaper, and they were solving all the world's problems. I walked in and they're laughing, and I worked with David Raxon too, so we were friends. And I was so delighted to see those guys together. I don't think they hung out very much.
No, but they were just high. They were. I mean, they're in the hospital and they're having a ball. It's not normal.
They're talking about the business and all the guys that are writing and all the writers and the players that they love and what's wrong with the country and how It was.
I want to read this to you and then ask you a question. This is from my interview with a guy your dad may or may not have worked with, Charles McPherson. He said. Mingus was an innovator of the music. He was very passionate, very serious about what he was doing, especially composing. He believed in it. He was a real artist. Mingus wrote poetry. And there was a poet named Kenneth Patchen. He was a beat writer of the 50s. Mingus was a personal friend of Patchen's. Patchen was sick and needed help, so Mingus had the band do a benefit concert for him, and the money would go towards paying his hospital bills. And I didn't know that. Yeah, well, I mean, that's just from one of my many interviews, and I guess we are struggling so much, not just in this country, about understanding that the oneness of everybody and the idea that we are one human race, and that this idea of skin color has just become so played out and so devastating. It still haunts us as the original sin. And I just wonder about if you could talk about your dad, because, Mingus, listen, here it is, Patchen, beat poet, writer, pretty much broke, and here you have a guy who's performing black classical music, really, Mingus doing benefit for him. And I just wanted to know how your dad, I know how accessible all these amazing black musicians were, and I wanted to know, before your dad got ensconced in the studios, like how he connected with his black brothers and sisters.
Well, I have a picture of him when he was 17 playing with J.J. Johnson. He had a.
Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
No, they were friends. Well, just let me say this: he just despised prejudice. My dad, and he worked with everybody, and he got along with everybody who wasn't a jerk, and but he loved the musicians, and he was aware that, of the subtle differences between black and white musicians. We to accommodate jazz, to bring jazz into our consciousness. You had to accept the black culture. I mean, that's the origins of hip, is white kids being part of the culture of black musicianship. And that's where a lot of the language comes from, that, wound up being so-called like hippie terminology and stuff. It came from black musicians. And when white musicians and black musicians could finally comfortably or uncomfortably work together, they both learned a lot. They each learned a lot. And of course, we took a lot of the mannerisms and vocabulary and so forth.
He was playing piano with JJ? Like, how did he get?
Yeah, he had they played all over up north. They played along the Russian River, the resorts there during the holiday season. And
my God, wait, we're talking like in the mid-50s, late 50s? When was this?
Yeah, well, let's see. He was born in 37. By the time he was 17, it was right before he went into the Army. He was still a kid, but his mom my grandmother made him play the piano, and Dad always said, I hated taking piano lessons and having to practice. I wanted to go play basketball. My mom made me practice, and he said it was kind of a two-sided coin, because she wanted it because it was a status symbol, oh, my son plays piano,
right,
to her friends.
Right.
But to Dad, he was grateful that he acquired that discipline early in life, because he never would have without her. And so through his teen years, he was kind of like a child prodigy on the piano, or so he thought that he was being made into. And he had a casual band, and they played jazz. But when he fell in love with jazz and he understood that was the music that he needed to learn, he would sit down with the recordings for hours and take down the parts one at a time. There was all the composers at that time were guys learning how to arrange. They had to take it off a record themselves,
right.
And they had to learn how to do it. There were no textbooks for it, which is also really fascinating, because now we have so much instructive material out there. It's a whole different world.
Well, I mean, it was
wonderful.
I think, I mean, part of it
partly responsible for that.
Well, so much is going through my head. I mean, I think part of it's like, regardless, it was, you had to be autodidacts. I mean, you were listening.
That's
it was auditory. So your ears, you were learning to hear the music before you were learning to read the music. And therefore your ears were not locked. They were wide open. And I think that that's a crisis today within the academy. So many kids are growing because we're saturated with information. So much of it is visual. Everybody's, there's a Dan Ferguson methodology book, Kenny Burrell, Pat Martine. I'm kidding. I don't know. But there's just so many books. Yeah. There's just so much out there. Everybody's comping and reading before they can hear it. And so, there's a homogenization of sound that comes from that. And that's why it's hard to tell who the players are now. Back then, everyone's ears were so huge that you could tell, just from a drummer's point of view, you could tell Pete LaRocca from Mickey Roker to Max Roach. Everybody had a different sound. So, your dad, the fact that he took each piece off a record and had to transcribe, that to me was only helping his ability to hear the music. But you would say that he was playing like up-tempo bebop with J.J. Johnson before he went to the Army?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably, these were sometimes society gigs and everything. Just to explain, we're like a 4-generation musical family. His dad, my grandfather, he played trombone with Paul Whiteman for a while.
Wow.
And he had music stores in the Bay Area. And I still meet musicians today that, remember going into Gramps' music store.
Well, I'm sorry, how do you spell the name?
Which
the music store?
Ferguson's Music House.
And this was
it was like San Jose.
Oh my God! Wait, so it was in the South Bay, or where was the?
No, it was in San Jose.
It was in so he had
we were all born in San Jose.
Oh my God, that is so ridiculous. So he had instrument stores, musical instrument stores. Or?
He rented instruments to schools, band instruments. He had pianos, organs, guitars. I remember going in there and seeing the most beautiful Gibson guitars, and he had sheet music too. So that's where I discovered Bob Dylan and various other people.
You couldn't have picked a better time in our cultural heritage.
I would go down there with my grandfather and learn everything I could about every instrument.
But what I'm saying is he must have had an amazingly thriving business, because it was instruments were everywhere at that time.
Yeah, I think it was successful. It was successcul.
All I'm saying
he would not even understand that you could call up and get an instrument delivered to your home 24 hours a day, like you can now. that would.
Yeah, no,
But
but
I
I mean,
think he
just like
would.
the idea of, um, the significance of music in our culture was so heavy at that time. It was a major part of our culture. It wasn't made for multitasking or it was. I mean, that was the height of it, and so every high school had big bands and every school had instruments. So I'm just saying he definitely. I mean, he may not have been wealthy per se, but it was a good business to have,
Oh yeah.
especially compared to today's time.
Well, it's of a paramount importance to my grandfather and my dad and myself. The role of music in our society. My dad was a philosopher too. He'd say, you know, the only measure of a man in this society is how much money he makes. And it really used to really irk him. You know,
Yeah, right.
so he had a way of looking at things in a stark way. But he was also a very funny guy at times. He loved Kenneth Patchen. I loved Kenneth Patchen. I still do. And I found out recently that he and that Bob Dylan was also a big Kenneth Patchen fan. I never knew that, but
Well, no, because that makes
stands to
total sense
reason.
because you literally
Yeah.
had around. I mean, at the same time that I read that McPherson quote about Mingus playing the concert for Patchen was the same period of time
Yeah.
that Nat Hentoff was writing liner notes on Columbia for Mingus and Bob Dylan. So there's no doubt that they were
Right.
all just swimming around. Kenneth probably performed at the vaunted Gaslight Theater where Bob got his start. So there's no doubt that, and that's a beautiful,
Right. Like
yeah.
musical criticism, tends to, separate all these into styles as if they were, different, different complete societies. But if you read Bob's book, his memoirs, he went out and listened to jazz almost every night. He knew all those guys. There was a great camaraderie between any accomplished live musician, regardless of the genre. They all respected each other and took from each other, as far as I can tell.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I just want to get an idea about, like, were you hip to? I mean, this is more like I'm not sure how long you lived in the San Jose area for, but
Mm-hmm.
the cats that I'm familiar with down there are. There was a club called Popeyes, and
Mm-hmm.
the guys that I know kind of ran, or at least were part of the black jazz clubs that or blues clubs was John Turk, who played organ and trumpet,
Okay.
Clifford Coulter, Ronnie Beck, and these guys
Mm-hmm.
eventually put out albums, or at least Clifford Coulter did on. Ed Michel from ABC Impulse discovered them and put them on some records. That was in the early '70s. Can you talk a little bit about the club scene when you first were just going out and playing, maybe just playing for free out there?
Yeah. Well, we all moved down here when I was 7. We moved down to Los Angeles.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So even though I still have a family up there, I kind of lost touch with it. I mean, I would go back until I was about 15 when my grandfather died. Let's see. I wanted to get back and answer your earlier question
Sure.
about the chamber jazz sextet and what he was trying to accomplish. He was trying to take some of those older European forms like the Passacaglia fugue or sonata form, the suite, the idea of suites, because he did a couple of things like that with the chamber jazz. He wanted to apply that, rationale to jazz, so that there were so music interacted in that kind of formal way, but then big areas for improvisation and everything. And Dad always found remarkable musicians as well. There was a guy that was in the chamber jazz sextet. His name was Modesto Briseño. When he was 17, he was a world-class baritone jazz saxophonist. and he lived with us for a while, and unfortunately died in a car accident when he was 22. This guy would have been a giant of the jazz.
Wow.
Modesto Briceño. His son is a trumpet player, I believe.
Wow.
Out of Santa Cruz now. So that was the attitude of applying some of these. Up until then, he knew that jazz came largely from the blues and from earlier, form, ragtime, whatever. He understood that's where it came from, and he also understood American popular music, because he knew all the songs from Tin Pan Alley and all that, and he was a scholar himself of arrangers, and he was good friends with all those guys, and I, because of that, I had the good fortune to work with a lot of those people. I look back on my career. I played with Louis Armstrong and
absolutely
Louis
remarkable.
And people like that. I had a great advantage because of that.
At a certain point, did he, what you were talking about before with the Patchen and the chamber ensemble is just the idea of the concept in my mind of jazz is like you're having a conversation and you're playing off of each other, and so he allowed for that to happen. And did he have a working trio? I mean, the early '60s, you had Bill Evans, Scotty LaFaro, Paul Motion, Chuck Israels, and Shelly Manne there was a lot of counterpoint, beautiful, amazing expansion of vocabulary going on at that time. And, I'm looking here, he's conducting the Neophonic Orchestra with Kenton, Pescaglia, and Fugue. And did he actually have a working trio or any kind of band that he played with on a consistent basis in SoCal?
When he moved to Southern California, he said specifically to get in the middle of it and to work at the highest level that he could and also make a living. And I was always in awe of the fact that he was so true to his principles and still went out and made a living and fed everybody, which was a great accomplishment for him.
Absolutely, dude. No, are you kidding me? That's huge.
Oh, it was real. And when he got here, he started a rehearsal band. It was at the old Clover Recorders. I don't know if they're even still there. But
oh my God! Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's
Drumtown and Guitar City. I think it was, or Drum City Guitar Town. That's what it was. That anyway, he said that he rehearsed down there. I never went. I was still too young, I think, but. He had a rehearsal band which turned into the band that recorded with Bones Howe and on ABBA Records the Pictures at an Exhibition Framed in Jazz, which is still, to me, a landmark piece where he took Mussorgsky, kept everything in the same keys that Mussorgsky had for the piano, and just transcribed it, and he kind of minimalizes it. He says, well, I just made the figures swing. Well, he didn't. He orchestrated it and totally turned it into a bona fide jazz work of immense magnitude, I think. And it's all of the Pictures at an Exhibition in the order, in the right keys and the hard keys. And now my son Charlie and I, we listen. My son Charlie is a magnificent pianist, and we wanted to. He had a rehearsal band, and we wanted to play the Pictures at an Exhibition. So Charlie and I got the band together, and we had a couple of rehearsals, and then played the whole thing top to bottom. Charlie conducted it, and it held up it sounded like the record when we did it. Paul Horn is on that record. Do you have that record?
Dude, I need it. I'm like freaking out right now because, for what it's worth, the review on All Music says that this is so beautiful. I'm just going to read this to you. Since Modest Piano Suite has been orchestrated by numerous classical composers. The best known is Maurice Ravel's version. It has been given a dubious rock treatment by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and played on synthesizer by Tomita. So why not a jazz big band version? It turns out the band leader, Allyn Ferguson, beat both Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Tomita to the punch, but his master tape lay forgotten in the vault for 27 years, finally being released in 1989. Anyone familiar with the original work who loves his big band jazz should enjoy this CD. Shank, Perkins, Paisano, Roberts.
Yep.
And so, but is that true that there were no vinyl copies ever made of that album?
Well, the vinyl came out in 1964, and then there was a reprint. It changed labels, and I think in the early 80s there was something. There was the 89 release that combined some of the chamber jazz sextet with that. So, and I have that.
Are you're not going to tell me you have an original pressing on vinyl of that?
Yeah, I do.
Oh my dude, that is so insane.
I don't have enough to send out.
No, it's fine. I wasn't going to. No, I'm saying that is unbelievable. I mean, again, doing the beat poetry and jazz, and also doing now. So explain just because this is not exactly in my bag, what was, well, first of all, he did this before the electronic, like rock.
Well, it was 63, I think they recorded.
Yes.
And I used to go to grammar school humming this stuff, and people would look at me like, what's that? So that, it was, it got radio play on KVCA at the time, and it had some recognition when it first came out, and then it kind of disappeared. It was, the record company went under, and then somebody else bought it, and there were. What was the
record company, by the way?
It was Ava, I believe.
Oh my God, AVA, Ava. Of course it was. I think that is remarkable. I mean, here it is.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Archie Blyer.
Oh my God!
You remember that name?
I don't. I was born in '78. I'm not. I don't know. I was. I mean, can you just talk as best you can, even though I know you're a young kid? I mean, Tedesco.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm 69, man.
No. I totally. But in '63, you're still young at heart. But the thing is
yeah, I'm just a kid.
No, you're a kid.
I'm just finding out about the Beatles,
No, but I mean, Tedesco, Barney Kessel, Howard Roberts, those guys were like heavy bebop jazz guitar players. They hated rock. They played it. They could play it, but they didn't.
I think you're basically right about that. Tommy was a really good friend of mine, and we worked together a lot. And I've got some great Tommy.
We're going to get into it. I just my feeling is like, what if you could talk to my generation and especially cats that are going to hear this down the road about what the essence was of those guys. I mean, Barney was like a total intellect as well, very brilliant dude. And Tedesco, I mean, dude, this guy Jimmy Bruno told me the funniest story about going to Tommy's house, and Joe Pass is there, and Zappa, and then Tedesco's making sausages on the skillet, and he tells them, "Oh, I got to go pick up my sports car from the mechanic," and he tells Pass, "Hey, watch these sausages. Don't let them burn. Watch them." And so he leaves, and they pull the sausages off, but it's taking a really long time, and Pass is like, F him, let's eat them. And so everybody's eating, and Tommy comes back a little bit later, and, I mean, Jimmy said he had never seen Tommy ever lose his temper or get angry. He lost his mind. He went
really?
He went crazy, dude, because they ate the sausages. But I'm just like, this is too good to be true. You have Zappa, Pass, and Tedesco shooting the breeze with Jimmy Bruno,
Three Italians.
and they're just, and he's getting all worked up about the sausages. I'm like, this is what it's about, man. They weren't just sitting there wanking on their guitars, being like, look at my riffology, look at my technique, and it was like,
well, listen,
yeah,
Italians take sausage and peppers very seriously.
No, dude, I mean, but you know what it was? They were just somehow. It just seemed like they were conduits to the divine. They knew how to get out of their own way and let information come through them. And I just wanted you to talk about the essence and charisma of those guys and kind of how it rubbed off on you, even though you were young.
Well, I don't know where to start. I mean, I was enthralled by musicians, especially jazz music, studio musicians. I went to work with my dad, you know, a number of times, and when I was about 9 years old, he asked me, what do you think you want to do with your life? I said, well, I'm going to be a musician. He said, why? You want to think about it? It's a rough road, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, no. I said, I've never seen anyone have so much fun at work.
Wow.
You know,
that is so classic. That is so classic.
In a booth with Emil Richards one time.
Oh, bro, my God, my uncle, man. Go ahead.
You know, Emil became a good friend later, but I sat when I was 12 years old. I sat in a booth with Emil, smoking Camels and playing the vibes and the marimba on a radio spot date. You know, they were doing spots for radio.
Oh my dude!
You know, like
oh my dude!
And he's just sitting there with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, cracking jokes and playing like an absolute wizard. You know, and everybody in the place was like that. You know, they would crack jokes until they got to the count of three, and then everybody would shut up and play brilliantly, you know. Like
Victor Feldman's making jokes in the back. I mean, what that must have been, dude. That's magical. I can't even believe that you were. It's unreal.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like those guys. How would you describe their temperament? Because like, it was sort of like, I mean, listen, I know at a certain point that Cal Jader's working band had Cal was an alcoholic. Dick Burke was grossly obese. John Hurd had a stuttering problem. Mike Wolf had Tourette's syndrome, and they all poked fun at each other. It wasn't like everybody was sort of, you know, I mean, nobody took themselves that seriously. And I'm not trying to be naive because I know that racism was very overt and not as covert. But I mean, what did it say? What did it mean to you that?
Well, it was a little bit like gallows humor for some people.
That's right.
And they were extraordinary people for one thing, and they had amazing senses of humor. I mean, I could go on and on.
Please go on. I mean, this is what it's. I mean, I really want to hear. This is I just love. I mean, like, was it Julius Wechter, Jimmy Bond? Who was in these sessions?
Well, it changed. I mean, if you look at the instrumentation, the guys on the Pictures at an Exhibition album, these were guys that were all working all the time, and in God knows what, you know, it was a rock and roll session to a jingle session to a movie call to a Frank Sinatra date. You know, I mean, it's just that kind of variety, you know, can really stoke the fires. You know, you're going from one thing to the next. You're getting better at managing all this information and playing your instrument. You know, like the growth was big. You know,
you're absolutely no. I mean, I'm looking here. I mean, like you said that they were, besides the joking. I mean, can you just talk about? I think this is I just had a guest on before. She's a younger singer, sort of in the pop rock realm, and she, you know, we were talking about, you know, this thing that all the album, the pocket of time that I really love in music is basically late 60s into early 70s. I mean, Seals and Crofts, it's on the rock level.
Yeah.
All those out, Seals and Crofts, the band albums, this is what I wanted to ask you about, was what you learned and how your dad went about, because all they did in those sessions, and again, they were rock sessions, a little bit different, but it was all about pre-production. Everything was done in pre-production. You'd work out the arrangements, you'd practice it, but once you hit the record button, you ran it down once or twice and you were done. And there was no perseverating in post-production on the back end. There might be an overdub or something, but everything today in modern recorded music, there's so much post-production and so much synthetic overlaying that I can't even feel the music. I can throw a Curtis Fuller.
Well, that was just simply the way it had to be done in those days.
Because there was so much work.
You had to, session time was expensive, studio time was expensive, and you had to go in and do it in 3 hours, whatever the job was, essentially. And these guys were not just jazz musicians; they were classical musicians. They were well-rounded as a musician could get. And so there was nothing that was unfamiliar to them. And then they're creative on top of it. They're asked to be creative on top of it. Well, that's a wonderfully freedom-loving kind of thing. This is the history of American popular music, and it's changed over the years as studio time, as budgets got bigger and studio time gets cheaper or whatever. You spend weeks in the studio doing overdubs or whatever, vocals. It didn't work that way in the old days. You went in and record. You were already well practiced from the stage, first of all.
Of course.
You went into the studio and it was like, well, play it again, but then you put everything into it. And you're always at the mercy of, a producer or an A&R guy who doesn't. Mike Melvoin told me something really funny one time. He goes, we work in a business that, where we serve music essentially for 13-year-old girls. He says, but you have to appeal to a 33-year-old guy who thinks like a 13-year-old girl. And
it sounds about right.
Humorous insights that you'd hear all day long from these guys.
What can you talk about a defining? I know your dad was, he led through actions as much as words, but can you talk about a defining? One of the L's of my program is leadership. Can you talk about a defining moment of leadership, like when things were going off the rails a little bit or whatever, and he, what he did to not just hold the session together, but make it remarkable?
Well, I remember that he and Jack Fearman, who was a conductor and a great trumpet player, they were best of friends. And Dad had a job with Johnny Mathis because he conducted for Johnny Mathis for years. And then they did an album of all Broadway material, but it was done as in a very swinging, jazzy, bluesy style. And they had to write an album for 20 pieces or 15 pieces or whatever it was. It was strings, so that was bigger, maybe 25 pieces. And a Broadway Tin Pan Alley song sung by Johnny Mathis in a jazz style. And they had to do this in like 4 days. And so they basically were up for 4 days. And my mom was making coffee, and they were taking turns writing and copying each other and stuff like that. And then they went and did this session with Johnny. And later on, Dad had the tapes from it. And he said, can you believe this? Mercury wouldn't release the record because Johnny was, a crooner. He was a ballad guy. He didn't sing jazz. The public won't understand this. And it was finally released in 2012 on I think it's on the Global Masters record. It's the swingingest, greatest. I listened to it in the car and I just laughed at how good it is. And it came out. They did it in the early '60s. It wasn't released till 2 years after my dad died.
What was the name of the album?
So he never knew it. it had been released.
What was the name of the album?
It's called Broadway.
That is well. You see, I mean, I got I'll send you my interview with Johnny because the thing about Johnny, nobody knows this. That the guy was absolutely at the forefront of the San Francisco music sound in the 50s with Merle Saunders. They were playing sock hops they were singing tunes with upright bass, keyboards, vibes, and a guitar. I don't know if there was even a trap set. And John, so we went through this whole, I mean, he was really part of that, Haight-Ashbury scene before the invasion.
That's right.
And
the
so
Black Hawk and all that.
he was molded into that crooner thing. But man, that guy, I mean, he wasn't, he wasn't.
Well, he had such a beautiful voice. Yeah. But what people didn't know at that time was he was a swingin'est guy around too. He could sing the blues. He could sing, jazz with the best of them. He could scat.
Oh, incredible! I mean,
he was ridiculous. Just an incredible musician.
I mean, we've already just been riffing here, and we've already discovered 2 albums that didn't come out till much later with Pictures at an Exhibition and then the Broadway. I mean, how many things were like that for your dad? Because he did so much that,
I think for as well known as he was unsung in a lot of ways. And it was because he was kind of a humble guy. He didn't toot his own horn that much, I mean, he was completely in charge of the orchestra. There's another segment of his history which was in the late 70s, about 78. He had something that had been on his mind for a long time. He wanted an orchestra that played jazz as well as they played the classics. And so that he always wrote for individual instrumentalists as much as possible. He was aware of who he was writing for. But he knew that, down the line it would be played by other people, and it had to be, well put together enough that anybody could play it after a couple of rehearsals. But then he just loved this ensemble. It was called The Orchestra, and we did about 1.5 seasons at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. Bones Howe did the sound, and Bones Howe was a guy that he was kind of a champion of Dad's, and Dad's first project, Pictures at an Exhibition was Bones, and the very last thing that Bones did almost was in 1989. He and Dad and I co-produced it. We won a Grammy for the Count Basie Orchestra with a record of Count Plays Duke. It was Duke Ellington songs played in the style of Count Basie.
Wow.
And it won a Grammy for the band. It was so good. Really, proud of that moment.
Dude, I love the fact that, I mean, well, my God, for the sake, we're going to have to do at least set 2. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, because your dad, we could talk about him for hours. I wanted to read this to you as it related to, to your, and get your take on this.
I can't believe it's done. It's already 1 o'clock. I can't believe it.
I've just been
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. It's it's kind of long, but just hang in. This is from Ernie Watts, from my 3rd interview with Ernie. He said, in around 1980, the 6 major record companies started buying up all the independent record labels. All the records were being made by Universal or Sony or MCA. In the late 60s, Creed Taylor created CTI, and he could figure out a way where he could structure the music that jazz guys were playing and do it in a glossy production manner, and they could make some money. Grover Washington came out of that, Hubert Laws, Freddie Hubbard.
Yep.
In 1980...
Stanley Turrentine.
Absolutely. This is the important part.
Grant Green. Yeah.
In 1980, the synthesizer entered the pop music world, and it was the new toy. Drummers like Harvey Mason, they were making their money from programming drum machines. They learned how to work those machines, and they were putting those tracks on pop records and some fusion records because that was the sound of the day. The bass became a keyboard bass for a little while. All the string sections became synthesized. All of the brass became synthesized. You couldn't sample a saxophone sound. It got too many overtones in it. Yamaha wanted to synthesize my sound, and they were going to give me a fee, but they weren't going to give me royalties. They wanted to pay me a flat fee to synthesize my sound and put it in one of their computers, but they only wanted to pay me one time. It got to the point in the early 80s that I would be the only acoustic player on a record. The music business changed totally in 82 and 83. Mm-hmm. Take it away, man. That's when you really were fully ensconced in the scene. I cannot think of a more... I know that you could still make some dough, but it must have been pretty depressing. Can you just break down what that was about?
Well, I did a lot of TV and movie work then in the 80s. I did a lot of shows with Mike Post and different things. And he still had orchestras. And by the mid-'90s, the only thing with an orchestra was The Simpsons for a while, and then The Family Guy. But everything else was synthesizers. So in the 80s, that's exactly right. The trend started to be towards
How did you I mean, can you just talk psychologically? I mean, you're just as a passionate music fan, somebody that comes from the lineage of a very entrepreneurial and very singular family musical style, and being around live musicians like Emil, Smoking Camels, playing jingles. Like, can you just talk about like what?
Well, it was a major upheaval for sure.
There was.
When we realized that you could, program a drum sound, everybody was enthralled with it kind of in the beginning. Well, isn't this a great toy?
Right.
And I remember, I grew up with the guys from Toto, and over at the studio, Steve had racks of synthesizers. I mean, he was really a synthesizer expert, It's not just a guy who knows how to play keyboards and push buttons, but he knew how to program everything about a synthesizer. And then Roger Lynn brought a drum machine over, and that was enthralling. Oh, I can't believe you can push buttons and it sounds like a real drummer. But it didn't take long before you found out what the limitations were of it, And unfortunately, by that time, people's ears began to be accustomed to this sound.
Exactly.
And there was some excitement to it as well, And it was certainly fun to put a whole track together on your own in your basement, without the guys there. But shortly you realize, well, I miss the guys, I miss the guys together and the interaction between the players, So that's when it started becoming more like a recipe of making a record. It needed this kind of bass sound, and the drums needed to do this, and and then the big producers did that with singers, and it started to become the way people grew up listening to music. Not so optimum in the end, because there was a backlash, and orchestras became, as a result of that, I think one of the things that made orchestras more desirable, to hear a whole bunch of guys playing live music became like a fresh thing again. So,
well, I mean, how did it? I mean, I want you to just, as a musician with huge ears, just talk about how the mechanization of rhythm constricted the space in the music, because the music I love to listen to is round and it breathes and it has a lot of space in it.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden it just seemed like with that efficiency model came in, whatever was the last hit on the radio, they wanted the drummer, if it was a real drummer, just to play straight beats. And I just, from your point of view, how did you feel as a musician that you Rusty Young, who I interviewed, had passed away, rest in peace. He said he left the studio world because they only really, after a while, he realized in this time that we're talking about that they only really wanted him to fill a sonic space. They didn't want him to play a part. They just didn't want him to make a mistake. It became like public.
The individuality was lost,
Explain if you can explain that to non-musicians like me, not just originality but individual sound. How was that taken away?
Well, I think psychologically, it affected what was the mode of the day was you're playing with other musicians. That's where the give and take came in, and rhythms were not precise often. Rhythms were fluid, and there was a give and take between players. That was the fun of it. playing with a machine is a whole different thing, and you get a little off from the rhythm or whatever, or you feel it or you push it in a direction or whatever. It doesn't work when you've got a mechanical drummer. There's no interplay there, and that's critical for a live music. And but I mean, today there are people that go out and play. I'm even considering it myself, going out and playing in a restaurant with a drum machine or a prearranged track. It wouldn't have to be a drum machine, but so it's become a reality. But it's different than when you played. The only way you could make music is with other musicians.
I'm curious. I mean, can you just talk about? Can you just talk about the fact that you didn't have how the rhythm early on not being precise lent itself to, in my mind, a consistent increase in musical vocabulary up and through the mid 70s or so, and then it just stopped. Because it was like,
right.
It was like, I don't know. It was not quantized. It was
right. Well, here's a good example. You remember the first Buffalo Springfield album?
Absolutely, yeah.
All those guys played a little bit differently, and they had a little bit different concept, or a lot of different concept. They had different sounds. One guitar is on top of the beat, another one's laid back playing arpeggios in space. And nobody's really locked into the time, because the drummer is somebody that you listen to, and everything else kind of plays in context
exactly
to the drummer, but not necessarily with the drummer. So the drummer is a vital part of something, but it's not just there. He's not just there to keep time in some perfect way. He's there contributing music to the situation. Drummers are very musical. Some of the smartest musicians I know are drummers. They listen to everybody. They know what everybody's doing. They know the song. They set up things in the song. They know they're coming. Being a drummer is a drummer is almost like the conductor at times.
Well, I mean, it's the best kept secret in the world, and contrary to popular belief, but a lot of times they are the leaders of the band too.
Yeah, musician's best friend is a joke. Yeah.
I just want to. I want to put a piece of music in here for Dan Ferguson, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Oh, yeah.
Were you able to?
Thanks, Jake.
Were you able to hear that?
Yeah, very well. I remember that like it was yesterday.
I was just like hoping that they'd let Ferguson stretch out on a solo. You were playing like this really funky rhythm guitar, but I mean, I'm telling you, man, that VHS tape got me into music, man.
That's really.
It's so cool to hear. I mean, and I'm not even fibbing. It was a combination of seeing your dad. I kind of figured out later that you were his son, but it was Freddie, him, and just what we just
Chuck Findlay and Gary Grant.
Findlay,
everybody.
I'm just saying, like basically, and then Bill Mays on piano. It's everything. It was like 81, and they still had they had strings and horns, everybody hitting at the same time. It was completely the Jake Feinberg methodology of being live in the studio, and it just cooked so hard that it really put me. I said, my ear can. I mean, before I've never really been able to totally dive into Ornette or Archie Shepp. That music was, but this was like music that I understood, and it seemed like.
Well, obviously we're doing pop songs that people
Right.
know. I think I chose that song and wanted to do Birdland also.
Great choice.
I
Yeah.
suggested some of those songs, and Dad liked the idea, and he wrote them up. I mean, the way he organized the sessions was superb. We did one day with the horn section and one day with the string section, and then you mix them up on the record, so that there's a lot of variety. Same rhythm section. Abe, such a firecracker, man. It sounds good over the phone. And Bill Mays, he quit session work shortly after that and moved to New York because all he wanted to do is play jazz, trios, whatever.
Right.
And I respected him for that. A wonderful player. Bill Maxwell, I think, was my idea, and Dad loved him. He just loved Bill. He had him come over to the office and.
Dude, everybody. I mean, Bill Maxwell is. I talk to him once a week. He's hooking me up with David Robinson, the Admiral of the NBA. The guy, everybody loves Bill Maxwell. But no, the thing is that him and Abe at that time were Freddie's rhythm section at the Baked Potato. They were playing with Freddie.
Oh.
And so, like, that album, you're having a ball, too. You're, like, jumping out of your seat. But it's, like, it's the coolest. It's, like, the old Fantasy Studios, and everybody's in there together.
Well, I'll tell you where that was. That was at Ocean Way on Sunset and
Okay, so that was SoCal. That was Southern California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was originally on Electra Asylum. I think Electra. Bruce Lenvall did a spin-off from Electra, the jazz label. It didn't last very long. And by the way, I wanted to clear something up.
Go ahead.
I know I asked the trumpet players. At one point I asked the trumpet players, and Freddie was clean for those sessions.
Are you serious? Okay, it just what it is. He just he looks like he's high. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe so.
I mean, your dad was oblivious. Your dad was just like laser focused on like getting really funky out. Like so cool.
I'm telling you, Jake, he wrote those charts. He took so much care. He wrote 3 of those songs, by the way.
Dude, it's unreal. Dude, it's the swingingest. I haven't heard it in that decade as more swinging because it's freaking live, man, with all the cats.
He was one of those rare guys who could write the most intense orchestral stuff and swing like crazy.
Oh my, dude, that's it. That's it. That's the legacy. That's it.
It was July. He shows up in shorts for a video shoot.
That's what it was. That's what it was. That's what it was. And oh my God, dude. I mean, did he?
But technically, to have 3 cameras in the studio, that was a new thing. To have 3 good cameras in the studio, all in sync. There was a video truck outside. That was not very common. If it may have been the first session done that way. So it was kind of groundbreaking in a way, But,
it was. No, it was easy to run mics into a truck like Cal Jader would do live recordings in the early 70s, but TV technology camera technology had not evolved till 81, and you got that really hip. And again, it made sense. It was almost like collectively your dad and Freddie was like, okay, we're going to do this the right way, live in studio with all the cats. Like, I'm glad that there's something that late and that's swinging, because even now, I mean, I remember talking to Spinoza, and he was like, some of those records today, like bassy band stuff, you listen to it and it sounds really clean, but everything's mic'd, so it has a little bit of sterility to it, as opposed to before, when like a horn section had to balance themselves based off minimal. Not everybody was mic'd up. My final question in set 1 for you is, were you ever in a band or play a club where you were playing, you only had microphones, like no monitors? And if so, like, do you believe your ears grew the most from that experience?
Well, one thing that happens when it's set up that way is you balance on the bandstand, and you don't try to outplay everybody else. You're balanced together because you want to make sure everybody's heard. If you don't have monitors and that kind of thing, but
I mean, like that's that was also some of the stuff that was going on when your dad was coming up. Was that those guys did not have monitors. Yeah,
right. Well, that slowly.
Did you in your first like bands that you formed? Were you playing? What clubs were you playing, and did you play like with like a PA system and cause to me like that's when you have to stretch your ears out and listen to everybody on the bandstand because not everybody's mic'd up. You're going to get like a really warm. It's going to feel like people are trying to work together and not. It's not going to sound sterile. That's for sure.
Well, that happens all the time now in clubs. With a trio or a quartet, like John Pisano's guitar night that unfortunately had to stop during COVID. But that was a weekly. That was a weekly prayer service for guitarists.
Wow.
And then everybody went down and played. They had no PA system or no monitors on stage. Everybody was listening. Everybody from every guitar player you can think of played there with John. And I hope he restarts it soon. But I mean, club stuff he usually doesn't have a monitor, small club stuff, jazz club stuff.
I just wonder if you learned if that was in your earlier days, if you learned how to increase volume physically and acoustically because you didn't have the technology to blast out from a monitor.
Right. Well, first of all, the guitar sounds great. A good guitar plugged into an amp sounds marvelous.
Yes.
And the more things you hook onto it, the more, medicinal it sounds.
Right, right, absolutely.
But then I remember I played with Seals and Crofts. I did a summer with them. I played, guitar with Dash and Jimmy, and I think Mike Picaro was on bass and Jeff Picaro was on drums.
Oh my God!
And we had a good guy. Dinky Dawson was his name. He was the sound guy, and he created these parabolic monitors where you could, you didn't have to have. Well, it was before you put things in your ear, and you could stand in front of this parabolic monitor and walk around in like a 5-foot radius and still hear everything just right.
Really?
It was a great invention, but I don't think it ever got very far. But it's a marvelous idea. It looked like a bowl, a speaker that looked like a bowl. So wherever you moved, you could hear it. It was projecting towards you in some way.
We're going to have.
Speakers.
It's. We've just been cooking here for almost 80 minutes. Well, let's do set 2 really soon and continue down the path. And I don't. One of the cats I'm still looking for is Pisano. Can you connect me with him?
Oh, Pisano, yeah. I'll give you his phone number.
Yeah. No, I'll text you. Text me later. And I want to. You get to Ferguson. Well, you get to Danny Korchmar and you get to Ferguson. Then you're going back and you realize, oh my God, Don Peake is still there and Louis Shelton. I mean, these guys, because you know what? Like, I know that Victor Feldman and guys I've interviewed like Hal Blaine and Emil and Joe Porcaro, they're all pushing me. They're all pushing me forward on this journey because you know what? Really, so they were some of the last true American heroes, man. I mean, it's.
You are so right.
It's true, and that's the one thing I wanted.
My idols.
And you saw it up front, and I'm just in a fantasy, but now you can validate that for me, which is, it's just many blessings to you.
I've got extensive notes here, by the way, Jake.
Yes,
I got a lot of info, that it'd be fun to share with you, but
no. So let's
next time.
no. Listen, it is. We will let the pages fly next time.
Okay, my man.
All right,
It's
man.
been enjoyable.
Yeah, dude, it was a great hang. I'll get this up. I'll get you. Your son foisted a great old school picture of you on me, so I'll.
Where did you run into Zachary?
Dude, I'm telling you, this is. There are no. By the way, it's Wavy Gravy's birthday today, and I've done about 8 interviews with him.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I had a story about him too.
Why don't you tell it? It's his birthday.
Well, I was on the road with Joan Baez in 1976 with, get this, James Jamerson, David Briggs, and Jim Gordon.
Dude, wait, hold on. I want to stop you right there. Now I flashed on something. It wasn't that lineup, but that's where I knew Dan Ferguson from. Double Joan Baez album, right? Right? That you're on that. It's a live double album.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I just flashed on that. So you're telling me you went out with Jamerson?
Yeah, Jamerson and I became really tight, man. He was a beautiful guy. And
I didn't even know. I did not know that he was still. I did not know he was still functioning in '76.
I don't know how he got on that gig. Are we still on the air?
No, I want to get the Wavy. I want to get the Wavy Gravy. It's his birthday. I got to get.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we played the Berkeley Theater and Wavy was there.
Of course.
And I met him and stuff. And actually, it was kind of strange. Backstage, there's smokes going around and stuff like that, and I didn't really think about it. I wasn't a big participant in that, but I took a little puff of a joint that came by,
Yeah.
And then we went out and played, and all of a sudden I couldn't tell up from down and left from right, I was inside a bottle or something, and it turned out to be angel dust. Somebody said it was angel dust.
Shit.
I did, the whole thing went by in a flash, and I asked, and Joan later says, "I sounded great today, Dad."
Dude, I thought you were going to say it was hash, but that's really not a joke. I mean, angel dust is not.
Oh,
it was just
no.
wait. So Wavy was passing around joints with angel dust on him?
Well, no, I don't think I remembered. Wavy reminded me of it. I don't think he had anything to do with that moment, but I think he was standing there. But I don't know. I had another point in that.
Well, I know. I want to say that there are no. Let me tell you the story about your son. Is that there are no coincidences. Wavy was the one that told me that, and he's right. I mean, this is a guy who was opening for Thelonious at the Renaissance Theater when your dad was cooking around L.A. in the early '60s. And you want to talk about Monk would show up and Wavy would give him a full, huge Bob Marley joint downstairs, and he would suck it down in one hit and then go up, knock on the piano, and then play flawlessly for 2 hours. That was Monk. That's just one. But the point is that I'm going to friend you on Facebook as well. But I drive a lot of content because this interview that we've done, I've done 2,000. So I have all this content. I transcribe it, drive it out on new media. And, I got a message from Zachary, but I wasn't friends with him. So it was in these message requests. And when I opened it, he was like, "I dig your show. And by the way, my dad is Dan and my grandfather's Allyn." I said, and this was last week. And I said, well, now the spirits are calling because that's Allyn Ferguson is the reason. And Freddie Hubbard is the reason I got into jazz, basically. It was so, so Dan, and then of course I've seen you on tons of records. And so I was like, well, this is just part of the divine timing. That's all part of it. So, I'm grateful, man.
Well, Jake, you're right, man. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, we'll do it. No, we're going to hang, well, just the beginning, man. We'll do it. I'll get this up later tonight and we'll do part 2 real soon.
Okay, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Much love, Dan. Take it easy.
Yeah. Take care. Take care.
All right, brother.
Bye.
Peace. Full to hang with Pearl Charles and then Dan Ferguson on the Jake Feinberg Show. This is Power Talk. We will see you later.
Okay.
So